There is a moment that happens to almost everyone who is genuinely trying to get ahead financially. You're checking your account on a random Wednesday evening, not bracing for impact the way you usually do, not calculating whether the grocery run this weekend is going to create a problem somewhere else. You look at the number and something feels different. Not rich, not set for life, just different. Like a pressure you had stopped noticing because it had been there so long, quietly lifted a few degrees. Zane had that moment at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, sitting at his kitchen table with a bowl of cereal he had made for dinner because cooking felt like too much after the day he had just had. He had been contributing a fixed amount every month for 14 months straight. He had said no to things. He had made choices that felt uncomfortable in the moment and boring to explain to other people. And on that Tuesday night, the number on his screen crossed $20,000 for the first time. He did not pop champagne, he did not post about it, he just sat there for a moment, looked at the number, and felt something he had not felt about money in years. He felt like it was working for him instead of against him. What Zane did not fully understand yet was that the shift he felt in that moment was not just psychological. The mathematics of his financial life had just changed in ways that would compound quietly for the next 30 years. This is the story of what $20,000 actually does, not just to your bank account, but to your brain, your career, your decisions, and the entire trajectory of everything that comes after. Why this number and not a different one? Before we get into Zane's story, it is worth understanding why $20,000 represents a genuine inflection point rather than an arbitrary milestone. Most financial conversations focus on the large numbers, $1 million, 6 figures, retirement targets that feel so distant they barely register as real. And in doing so, they skip over the threshold that actually changes daily behavior for most people. The point where a genuine financial buffer exists between you and the next unexpected thing that life decides to send your way. For most households, 3 to 6 months of living expenses lands somewhere in the range of $15,000 to $25,000. $20,000 sits squarely in the middle of that range for a large portion of working adults. This is not an investment number yet. It is a foundation number. And the difference between building on a foundation and building on exposed ground is the difference between everything feeling fragile and everything feeling like it might actually hold. The two brains. Here's the piece of this that the financial industry almost never discusses because it doesn't show up neatly in a spreadsheet. The human brain operates fundamentally differently depending on whether a financial buffer exists or not. When there is no buffer, when the account is thin and the next paycheck is the only thing standing between you and a genuine problem, your brain allocates an enormous amount of cognitive processing to threat monitoring. Psychologists who study financial stress describe this as a scarcity mindset, and the research behind it is striking. When people are operating in genuine financial scarcity, measurable cognitive capacity is consumed by the ongoing management of financial anxiety. Decision-making quality declines. Risk assessment becomes distorted toward short-term survival over long-term optimization. Opportunities that require any upfront patience or delayed gratification become nearly impossible to pursue because the brain is already running close to capacity just managing the immediate situation. Zane knew this feeling intimately, even though he had never read a word behind the research. He knew what it felt like to take a job offer he wasn't excited about because declining it while his account sat at $300 felt impossible. He knew what it felt like to stay in a situation he wanted to leave because leaving felt too risky. He knew what it felt like to say yes to things he didn't want to do because he needed the income more than he needed the boundary. That's not a character flaw. That's a brain doing exactly what brains are designed to do when resources feel scarce. The buffer changes the operating conditions. And when the operating conditions change, the brain starts producing different outputs. Now let's look at the numbers directly, because this is where most people's intuition breaks down. Zane had been saving and investing $1,000 a month. Getting to his first $20,000 took him 14 months of consistent effort, discipline, and regular friction with his own spending impulses. 14 months. That's not a short time. That's a year and 2 months of choosing the future version of yourself over the present version of yourself repeatedly in small decisions that nobody around you notices or celebrates. Here's what changes at month 15. Zane is still contributing the same $1,000 a month. His behavior hasn't changed, his income hasn't changed, but his existing $20,000 is now generating its own returns alongside his contributions. At a conservative average annual return, that base is adding somewhere between $150 and $200 each month in growth that Zane didn't have to earn from his job. His second $20,000 doesn't take 14 months. It takes closer to 12. His third $20,000 takes less time still. Each subsequent milestone arrives faster than the previous one, not because Zane changed anything, but because the accumulated base is doing an increasing share of the work. By the time Zane's portfolio reaches $100,000, his monthly investment returns alone are generating nearly as much as his monthly contribution. He's putting in $1,000, and the account is adding $800 on its own. He and his money are working as a team now, rather than him doing all the lifting alone. By the time the portfolio reaches $400,000, the monthly growth from the existing balance exceeds his monthly contribution entirely. His money has become a more productive financial contributor than his actual savings habit. That's the architecture of compound growth. It looks completely flat and unrewarding for the first stretch, and then it begins doing things that genuinely change the shape of a person's life. The walking away number. There's a concept that wealthy people understand intuitively and that almost nobody explains clearly to people who are still building. It's the idea of negotiating leverage. When you have no financial buffer, every professional interaction you engage in is colored by the fact that you need the outcome more than the other party does.
You need the job offer. You need the raise approval. You need the client contract. You need the next paycheck to arrive on schedule. The other side of the table can sense this, even when you work hard to conceal it. It shows up in the slight hesitation before you push back on something unreasonable. It shows up in the speed with which you accept terms that a more financially secure person would negotiate. It shows up in the conversations you avoid having because the risk of an uncomfortable outcome feels too high. Zane had experienced all of this. He had accepted a project timeline he knew was unrealistic because he needed the contract. He had declined to ask for a rate increase with a long-term client because the thought of losing that income felt terrifying. He had stayed in a working arrangement that was gradually becoming worse because switching felt like it required a stability he did not have. $20,000 changed the negotiating math, not because Zane spent any of it, but because having it meant that the worst realistic outcome of any professional conversation was survivable. He could ask for the rate increase, and if the client walked, he had months to replace the income. He could push back on the unreasonable timeline, and if the relationship ended, he had room to absorb the gap. He could have the conversation he had been avoiding, because the outcome of that conversation, whatever it turned out to be, was no longer catastrophic. Zane did not suddenly become a different person professionally. He became the same person operating from a position of genuine choice rather than constrained necessity. The difference in outcomes was immediate and significant. Opportunities that were always there. Something else happened to Zane in the months after crossing $20,000 that he had not anticipated. He started noticing things he had walked past before. A colleague mentioned a small investment opportunity in a project they were developing. Before, Zane would have registered mild interest and moved on because participating required capital he could not comfortably deploy. Now he could actually run the numbers and make a considered decision. A professional development course appeared that would have required 2 weeks of reduced work and a meaningful upfront cost, Before, the income disruption alone would have made it impractical, regardless of the long-term return on the investment. Now, he could absorb the disruption and evaluate the opportunity on its actual merits. A rental appeared in a neighborhood he had been watching, listed below market rate because it needed work the current landlord did not want to deal with. Before, this would have been an interesting headline with no practical relevance to his actual life. Now, it was something he could investigate seriously. This is what people mean when they say money creates options, and options create more money. It is not a mysterious cosmic force that rewards wealth with more wealth for no reason. It is simply that having a financial foundation converts potential opportunities into actual opportunities. The deals were always there. The chances were always there. Zane just hadn't previously been in a position to reach them. The decision filter that changes. Here is a shift that Zane did not expect and found genuinely liberating once it happened. When his account was thin, he made a lot of small financial decisions with a lot of mental energy. He evaluated every modest purchase with a level of scrutiny that was exhausting relative to the actual stakes involved. $3 became a calculation. Minor discretionary spending became a source of low-grade guilt. Small choices consumed cognitive space disproportionate to their actual financial impact. After crossing $20,000, something about this changed. Not because Zane became careless with small expenses, but because his brain recalibrated what actually required serious attention. He stopped agonizing over the small decisions and started thinking harder about the large ones, where he lived and what that cost relative to his income, what he drove and what that was actually costing him an opportunity over a decade, whether his income trajectory matched what he was genuinely capable of producing, how his investments were allocated, and whether that allocation made sense for his timeline. These are the decisions that actually move the needle over years and decades. The daily small purchases that consume so much anxious energy for people operating without a buffer are, in the grand arithmetic of a financial life, largely irrelevant. $1,000 a year in coffee, often cited as the emblem of frivolous spending, is not what separates people who build wealth from people who do not. The house, the car, the savings rate, the investment consistency, these are the variables that compound into large numbers. Zane's brain, once it had a foundation to stand on, naturally redirected its attention towards the decisions that deserved it. The trap right at the threshold. There is a mistake that a significant number of people make at exactly this moment, and Zane nearly made it himself. You hit $20,000, you feel the shift, you feel the breathing room and the quiet confidence and the sense that the discipline was worth it. And then, some part of your brain, the part that has been deferred and delayed for 14 months, starts presenting arguments.
You have earned this. You have been so disciplined for so long. One purchase, one upgrade, one experience to mark the milestone is reasonable. You deserve to enjoy what you built. Zane heard all of these arguments. They are not unreasonable arguments. The problem is that $20,000 spent is not $20,000 resting on the other side of a threshold you worked for over a year to cross. It is $0 and a return to the operating conditions that made everything harder. The $20,000 is not a reward. It is a foundation. Spending it to celebrate building it is the financial equivalent of demolishing a house because you were proud you finished construction. Zane kept it. He did mark the milestone, modestly, in a way that cost him an evening and a reasonable dinner and nothing that put a dent in the number on his screen. And then he kept going. What Zane's life looks like now. 3 years after that Tuesday night with the cereal and the screen and the quiet shift in pressure, Zane's financial picture looks structurally different. His portfolio has crossed $80,000. His monthly investment returns now contribute meaningfully alongside his regular contributions. He renegotiated his primary client contract 14 months ago, and the conversation was straightforward because the worst outcome was survivable. He took 3 weeks off last autumn, genuinely disconnected, and the financial impact was absorbed without drama. He drives a 7-year-old car that starts every morning and costs him almost nothing to own. He lives in an apartment that is comfortable and affordable and does not require his absolute maximum income to sustain.
He does not talk about any of this at dinners or post about it or explain it to people who ask why he hasn't upgraded his car or moved somewhere more impressive. The people who ask those questions are optimizing for how their financial life looks from the outside. Zain is optimizing for what his financial life can produce over the next 20 years. These are different goals, and they lead to different decisions. He is not sacrificing enjoyment. He is not living a diminished life in service of some future abstraction. He is simply a person who crossed a threshold 3 years ago, felt the operating conditions of his financial life change, and chose to protect and build on that foundation rather than dismantle it for a short-term signal. The compounding is quiet. It is invisible from the outside. It does not make a good story at a dinner party, but it is working every single day whether Zain is paying attention to it or not. And that, the idea of something working for you steadily and silently in the background while you live your actual life, is what $20,000 really buys. Not security forever, not wealth overnight, just the beginning of a system that runs in your favor instead of against you. That is worth more than almost anything else you could do with the same amount of money. Start building the foundation. The shift on the other side of it is real, and once you feel it, you will understand immediately why protecting it matters more than almost any purchase you could make instead. If this helped you see the number differently, hit the like button and subscribe to
Wetrix Invest.
Because next time we are going even deeper into what happens after the foundation is built, and that is where things get genuinely interesting.